If you love history and space exploration, you're going to love today's Watch Events episode. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Yashira Rivera, the assistant manager of the Omega Boutique and Miami's Design District, for always keeping the channel in mind and adding my name to the attendee list. Today you'll hear from Eric, vice president of Christie's watch department and former Hodinkee contributor, Petrus, the Omega museum manager, and finally, James Reagan, the NASA engineer that wrote the requirement for NASA, in addition to being the man that tested all the submitted watches, putting them through a grueling battery of tests. While you hear from these special guests, you'll see clips of vintage and highly collectible Speedmaster references that will be auctioned by Christie's in New York later this month. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, sit back, relax, and enjoy this piece of American history.
We're going to have an amazing night. Some of the stories you're going to hear about are going to be absolutely phenomenal.
So the whole impetus for this event is that 1 week from today we have a special thematic auction that we've called Omega Speedmaster 50. The auction is, of course, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Ed White's spacewalk. That's sort of where the 50 comes from, not the 50th anniversary of the Speedmaster. They began sort of prototyping it in 1956. It was introduced to the market in 1957. It was part of a line of professional watches, the Speedmaster, the Railmaster, and the Seamaster. Of course, the Seamaster and the Speedmaster are the two most famous watches for Omega today.
Alaska 3 is our internal code name for space shuttle watches. So instead of providing him with a moon watch, we provided him with 3 different types of watches that we codenamed Alaska 3. In the end, after the tests, again the moon watch, as we call it today, won out. Rather a specific version with a special dial and things like that. Alaska 4, hugely important and unknown to this day, under this name at least, it's digital LCD watches. Because you have to know, it's the 70s, okay? So astronauts kept being bombarded by Hewlett-Packard, by Texas Instruments, by Pulsar. People want the future, and the future was digital in our minds today, at that time. So he kept being bombarded by, yeah, but maybe a digital watch or whatever. He kept saying, nah.
Every time.
Because it doesn't work. But we had to sort of anticipate both him and everybody else. So Alaska 4 is our try to sort of produce something that he could use. In the end, they ended up being worn privately by a specific number of shuttle pilots, as we call them, so astronauts who flew them. There are pictures that show these watches being worn. 1964, when you create this RFP for manual wind watches, or at least chronographs that can be worn manually. This is a question we receive a lot at the museum. 1964, automatic chronographs for him. Why would this be an impossibility in the first place?
They were not.
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
There were none. Yeah, because in 1964, other than a certain prototype that happened to be a Alemania prototype, by the way, our movement maker at the time for the chronographs, because they made in the 1940s an automatic bumper-wound caliber 321. So calling that pioneering spirit.
Yeah.
But other than this, it's 1969 with Seiko, and then the threesome with Buren and Hamilton and all that, and of course Zenith. So we talk about your country's space history here. So this is already quite a huge topic that sometimes runs risk to be forgotten by current young generation. So when you narrow it down to watches, it's not about brands and things like that. It's about something really, really special. So it's nothing to do with marketing here. This is real history that really involves and touches on your amazing country's, one of your greatest hours, basically. I mean, space program. And it involves our watches. I mean, how cool is that actually? So just keep it and hold on to it and then try to rekindle it, because yeah, we're losing it.
James, tell us a little bit about what led you to NASA, and then sort of the synopsis of why you got placed with the watches, why you thought they were important.
I was probably like a lot of young engineers going through school when Kennedy made the announcement that we were going to start NASA and we were going to the moon and come back within a decade, and always had an interest in doing that. When Gemini came along, they created it was called Flight Crew Division, and he decided that he couldn't get the people that did the big boosters and those type rock boosters, the spacecrafts. They didn't want to mess with what they called the little dinky stuff. And so Deke decided to start his own engineering group over there. And so he wanted a watch that he could count on and was going to work, and that he made it very clear that an astronaut's life could, you know, hold in the balance of the thing when we started going to the moon. And so that's the first big project I got. And so I had to get pretty quickly up on watches, which I wasn't at the time. I had to do a procurement just like I was procuring for a vehicle for the government or a booster or whatever, to write a specification, to put out all the requirements, and then put this out on what we would call an RFP, or request for proposal. And then I had to give the contracting officer a list of 10 different watch manufacturers at the time that I thought might have the capability. We ended up getting 4, 3 of which we accepted. Bought 3, as you mentioned, of each watch. Actually bought them. They didn't give it to them. Actually bought the watches, and they were cheap. Yeah, $86 a piece or something like that. I wanted one that I had to test. I wanted one to give to the astronauts to evaluate, and some of them were familiar with the Omega already. But I gave it to Ed White because I knew that would be the first EVA that would go out on, and we needed that test too. And then I kept the 3rd one just in case I screwed up a test or we screwed up a test. The requirement was, of all these tests that he read out, the requirement was it had to pass, one watch had to pass every one of them. I couldn't test, 2 here on this and 2 tests and go that way. In the end, when we finally got through with the test, the only watch that made it through was the Omega. But Omega would consistently hold plus or minus 6 seconds per day. And if you ever find any of my test procedures, that's what it said. As the crews came along on the shuttle missions, I didn't have enough watches to give them. And so I went prepared another procurement, sent it to Deke, and he called me up and said, "What are you doing buying more watches? How many have you bought?" And I said, "Well, 90-some I've got." And he said, "Why don't you have enough to supply them?" And I said, "Deke, why don't you make your astronauts give them back to me?" They said, and he said, "You give me a list of who has those watches, and I will get them back." And so, thank God I kept meticulous records. In a week, he put out a memo to all the astronauts and CC'd me, which said basically, you turn these into Reagan, unless you're a backup or a prime crew that still has to have them. And if you don't, you will get no more flying time on your T-38s. And I got them back in the boatloads. They came back, and they like to fly those planes. So when I got all those back and got to the point where, these are historically worth some money to somebody. And so what I did was take any watch that had any flight history on it at all, and I set those aside. And then I used all of the others. There was 52 maybe of those, 53. Used all the rest of them for training of for ALT and training of the crews for the first few shuttle missions until they finally gave me enough money to buy the shuttle watches. And those ended up going to the Smithsonian, and they're still there. Neil Armstrong watch is kept in the director's office at the Smithsonian in what they call the Smithsonian Castle downtown. Collins is on display, but not Neil. All of the Apollo watches were 321 caliber. There was nothing until the shuttle watches where we got to a different number. Omega had no earthly idea what it was going to do with them. That specification was written so nebulous that I could have been putting them in a vehicle somewhere. They had no idea. But on Gemini 4, Ed White went out EVA. Now he's far enough away that they could get pictures with the Hasselblad, even though it was a point-and-shoot camera of him. And there was a spread of about 10 or 12 pages. And the minute that hit, Time Magazine is the one that published it. The minute that hit, I get a call from Norman and Lawrence, a guy named Bob Pliskin, who was our sales director, I think at the time, saying, I got a question. You know, was that our watch EVA? And I said, I thought you never called, but yeah, we're flying your watch. And that's the first time that Omega really knew we were flying their watch. They had no earthly idea.
To have a non-Omega person say this. Such amazing.
It's the truth. It's the truth.
I hope you liked this summary of a great evening with iconic guests and watches. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, don't forget to hit the like button, and as usual, if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. That's it for this one. CG out.